Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we're with James Brogan, who is a UK paramedic teaching at Robert Gordon University in Scotland. He's a lawyer, and he's currently going through his PhD. James, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Aebhric. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
Gosh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I am the principal lecturer of paramedicine at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, as you've said. So I am responsible for all paramedic provision at RGU. Primarily, the focus of that is the pre-registration BSc paramedicine program that we run. And that covers the whole of the north of Scotland, so the geographical areas of Grampian, Highland, Orkney, Shetland, and the West Isles. Within that, our strapline is that we are the only UK university that truly offers that urban, rural, and very remote working. In that we have our students, our pre-registration students, working in cities of Aberdeen and Inverness, but also in some of the most remote and rural parts of the UK, in the Highlands, on the mainland, and then obviously in the island boards, as I've mentioned, where it may be that in order to get to patients, they're having to work with other colleagues from Royal National Lifeboat Institution, His Majesty's Coast Guard, to be able to actually even access these people who live in the most remote parts of the UK.
And because you're based in Aberdeen, isn't Robert Gordon also tied in with the offshore industry and the remote and the offshore paramedics?
Yes, absolutely. So that is something. So the program at Robert Gordon University, as with almost all of the Scottish universities that now offer paramedic education, we started in 2020. We started September 2020, mid-pandemic. As a response to the Scottish Government commissioning programmes to meet the requirement for the Health and Care Professions Council, the regulator of paramedics in the UK, changing the requirements, their standard of education and training, Set 1, saying that ordinarily you need to have a degree to now register as a paramedic. So we've only been going for the last 5 years. So we've been primarily focused on the pre-registration program, but yes, being in Aberdeen, the energy capital of Europe, there is a distinct opportunity there, and we do have really strong links as a university with colleagues offshore and in the energy sector, not just clearly in engineering and other parts of the university, but those are the things that we're now developing, and we're keen to further develop the offering that we provide to healthcare professionals and practitioners working in those remote and offshore environments.
And just the fact that you are in Scotland, there's just vast amounts of rural areas, and it's called the Highlands and Islands of northern Scotland, isn't it? That's just the paramedic can be hours away from hospital, or even getting to a proper dual carriageway.
Yes. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not a native Aberdonian. So I'm originally from the West Midlands, and I moved to Aberdeen to set up this program and to open a new paramedicine department in 2020. And I hail from Hereford and Worcestershire in the West Midlands. So one of the green parts around sort of the Birmingham and Black Country conurbation. And I was really proud. I used to think I worked remotely and in a rural setting where I would often be 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes away from any sort of definitive care. And then when there was the introduction of the major trauma networks, so in the West Midlands as an example, the nearest major trauma centre would be the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. For somebody who's, say, in Hereford or Ross on Wye or Kington, if you're on the Welsh borders, you're talking a good hour and a half by road to get to the trauma centre. Now, then I moved to Scotland, and wow, were my eyes open to what being truly remote and rural meant. So the motorway finishes at Perth. So where I live, I have to travel over an hour and a bit to even get to a motorway. We have some of the most dangerous roads in the UK. I think statistically the A9 that goes through the Highlands is the most dangerous road anywhere in the UK, and actually there's a lot of political controversy around whether that will be dualled, or when the dual carriageway, when it will be turned into a dual carriageway from a single carriageway road. But yeah, we have students, and we're sending them into some of the most remote and rural parts where they are hours and hours and hours away from any sort of definitive care. And indeed, with the Highlands, as you sort of identified, we have lots of people that do skiing, other extreme sports, hiking, scrambling, lots of other sports, potentially sports injuries, not to mention all of the water-based activities that occur around the coast as well.
So if we're going to talk about remote and austere medicine, this is definitely your line of work. I mean, you're in such a remote environment that you're taking an hour to get to the person, stabilizing them, and then you have 2 hours driving. So how do you make that decision? So HEMS can call. You can call HEMS and they can get to you, but then wouldn't it take 2 hours for HEMS to get to you and bring your casualty back, or would you just drive them for 2 hours in the back of your rig?
That's a really great question, and again, I think it will depend on exactly where you are, and sometimes it's a combination of all of these things. So the Scottish Ambulance Service operates government-funded aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft as well. So those who are familiar with UK ambulance practice will be, acutely aware of inter-hospital transfers or transfers by ambulance. Scottish Ambulance Service has fixed-wing aircraft that will go up to islands and take people for their routine appointments back onto the mainland. Using their own fixed-wing aircraft assets that are government funded. There is also the charity air ambulance assets from Scottish Charity Air Ambulance. There is an aircraft based in Aberdeen. But again, that still, as you quite rightly say, covers the whole of the north of Scotland. And then there's also our students interface a lot more probably than others maybe would do with the Coast Guard as well, in terms of, so the charity air ambulance, for example, currently only operates during daylight, during the daylight, whereas the Coast Guard would operate at night time. There's lots of that sort of opportunity. And the other thing I probably should have said around our pre-registration program, talking about RGU specifically, was that we're really proud that we offer a significant amount of practice-based learning. So the college's 6th edition curriculum guidance, College of Paramedics, gives a sort of figure, an arbitrary sort of it gives a figure of a minimum amount. We do over double the amount of practice-based learning, or we offer double the amount of the recommended minimum from the professional body. And within that, 50% of that is working with Scottish Ambulance Service, but 50% of that time is also working outside what we're calling in our cross-sector environment. So in those non-traditional, those non-ambulance based areas, and that is across the four pillars of practice: so education, research, clinical practice, leadership and management. And that could be from emergency departments, primary schools, other community-based teams, prisons, different educational environments, research, professional body, regulatory organisations, so that our students, when they finish their programme, have a really well-rounded approach and are really well grounded in the four pillars of practice, which we've now seen pay dividends, whereby they then go off and are able to utilise that and work in a much wider variety of areas. Or if they are still working in that traditional ambulance sector environment, they're able to bring that learning and knowledge to where it really matters, to when they have to make pragmatic decisions and utilize those skills when they are in that more austere environment.
So you're saying that the regulation, ACPC in the UK, require a set amount of clinical hours, and your university doubles that.
So the regulator doesn't stipulate a minimum number of hours, but the college, as the professional body, recommends in its latest edition of the curriculum guidance and program management guidance, recommends a minimum number of weeks to do that. And that's in the ballpark of sort of 20, 25, 30 weeks equivalent of practice-based learning, and we're offering around 60. Wow. So and that is purposeful, because we have a great belief in that we are practice-based learning informs teaching, and the academic study, but the academic study also informs practice-based learning. Yeah.
So you're putting half of your time. So not only do you just double the, was it 1,200 hours ish that the colleges of paramedics require for a curriculum, for your 3-year curriculum, you're doubling that. And on top of that, you're putting your paramedics out and about in austere environments or non-ambulance locations.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see now from some of the emerging data, like I say, we've now had we're just about to have a third tranche, a third cohort graduate. You can see from the first two graduating cohorts that when you look at the data, there are currently 5 providers of paramedic education in Scotland. If you look at the data, you can see that even though we are the furthest into Scotland, if you wish, we're the furthest north, actually a significant number of our graduates are pursuing non-traditional, non-ambulance service career frameworks over and above, or even maybe leaving Scotland entirely and pursuing enhanced specialist advanced practice roles in other areas. So as an example, we've only had the 2, we're not about to have a third graduating cohort. I already can point to graduates of our programme that work in expedition and wilderness medicine, are now pursuing roles and employment in that sector. We have a student currently who has employment with the Coast Guard as a search and rescue paramedic. They're doing their paramedic winch cadetship to be a winch paramedic for the Coast Guard. We have another student that works in cruise ships. We have another student that is now on a critical care practitioner program, but in a hospital-based CCP program as opposed to an ambulance service-based CCP program. So again, that what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop the practitioner of the future, not just what the sector needs today.
Does your university also offer the Masters of ACP, the Advanced Clinical Practice?
Yes, it does. And the paramedic program, the paramedic team delivers on that. So we have a Masters in Advancing Practice for people who want to come and do urgent care, critical care. You can also, there's opportunities to build your own masters, because this is one of the pieces of work that I'm currently interested in and looking at, in terms of when you're in that austere environment. Traditionally in the UK, if you're going to become a specialist practitioner or an advanced practitioner, you will either focus on urgent care or critical care. But actually, when you're with a patient who perhaps you're on an island off, so this is one of the other things that a lot of people who maybe aren't from Scotland understand, is that you have Orkney or Shetland or the Western Isles. You have the mainland island, but then you also have other islands off that sort of main island cluster as well. And if you're working with somebody or you're with a service user in that environment, I don't need somebody who can only do critical care or only do urgent care. We sort of want somebody that can do a little bit of everything. The concept, as now defined by the college in the latest curriculum update, as the enhanced generalist. Somebody who can do some critical care interventions, but can also offer urgent care intervention as well. So that's something that we're currently discussing and looking at. But within that, there is that whole piece around meeting the needs of the people in the areas that they find themselves in. And interestingly, I think that's something that, as a profession, that is something that makes us stand out by comparative to some of our other colleagues in other professions.
That's really interesting that you are focusing on the austere environments. So in your curriculum, do you teach prolonged field care? Do you discuss the treatment and what's needed to be taught to the paramedic when they are dealing with a casualty for 3-4 hours at a time? And what Tom Mallinson and I published in the Journal of Paramedic Practice about the need for the PFC for the UK paramedics, but basically focusing on the ones that are just sitting in the car park for 8 hours. But you're also teaching your students to be in an austere environment and need these prolonged field care skills even before you get to the hospital.
Yes, absolutely. And you gave the example that I was thinking about when you were asking the question, in that increasingly now, the austere environment doesn't have to be something of a geographical distance from an emergency department. Increasingly, having patients with comorbidities, with multiple competing issues in the back of an ambulance sat outside an emergency department for several hours at a time, um, the approach that paramedics are having to take is different to when I trained originally, and when lots of my colleagues did. So actually that is the hallmark, I would say, of our profession, is that, and that's what we're really trying to push in our program, is it's around the decision making, the non-technical skills, the thinking part around, okay, so what is the let's almost raise our eyes from the problem immediately in front of us to also think a little bit more medium to long term around how am I going to manage this patient going forward, and also what potential differences, changes in the patient's presentation can I reasonably expect to consider that I might encounter going forward. Because we are even if listeners to your show are work in a very urban environment, they are now working, I imagine, I would suggest, in a much different environment that they would have been working in 5-10 years ago. In that, even if you are 5 minutes from the hospital, that doesn't mean that you are going to be in the hospital in 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes to the hospital and then a number of hours sat outside the emergency department. So the very nature of how we respond and how we manage these, people are living longer, having much more comorbidities, lots more complexity. You have to, in order to do that, you have to raise the bar of education to give students a really good grounding in decision making. And the best way to do that, we believe, is to focus on the idea of the austere environment of when you're in a limited resource area, whether that is by nature of geography, whether that is by nature of available resource, or whether that is because of system pressure, you can still operate and rely upon your skills to be able to do the best that you can for the service user that you have in front of you.
We ruffled a lot of feathers on that article, and we got some interesting comments and emails, but it sounds to me like you were already there, that you probably didn't change your curriculum from this discussion because you're already teaching austere medicine.
And I think you're right, and I think we've come at it from in part from a point of necessity, because of that we operate in the geography that we do. However, that it's the curriculum. We follow the college's curriculum guidance. We are validated by the Health and Care Professions Council. We meet all of the standards that we are required to do as any education provider of paramedicine does. It's around the lens through which you look at these problems and the way in which you then deliver that. So our view has always been that we are going to view this very much from an austere environment perspective. The other point I should probably say as well, the other very key pillar within our program, is around the role of the paramedic in public health, in terms of that. Often we talk about looking for upstream initiatives rather than fishing people out of the river. It's about going further upstream and finding out why they're falling in the first place. And we have that wider conversation, and that's something that we build into all of our teaching, in that actually, if I am with a service user in a remote part, I say on an island, it doesn't even have to be on an island. There are some extremely remote parts of the mainland of Scotland. If I'm with a patient who, I'm with them for problem A, whatever that might be, an acute problem or injury or insult, actually, while I am here, I may be the only healthcare professional that this person physically sees in a significant period of time. So whilst I am here, what is my role in terms of assisting this person individually, but also considering how I can assist them and signpost them to increase their health, but also what impact that will then have on the wider population health if all paramedics were thinking about it in that regard.
That is one thing I've noticed, the profound difference that you do as a UK paramedic, which is more of a holistic, big picture view, than from what I, growing up in the States and starting out my paramedic career there, it was scoop and run. And I'm going to anger a lot of Americans, but our job is to just keep them alive, get them through the doors, hand them off to the docs and nurses, and then we head out again. And there is no consideration about public health. There's no power given to us to go into a house and say, wait a minute, this OAP, this old lady needs this, to have her stop calling because she's calling every other day because she's tripping. And instead of just, all right, pick her up, take her to the hospital, your push as a paramedic in global health is looking at the big picture. How can we help our population as a practitioner, as a global health advocate, instead of shut up, scoop, give you some drugs to stop whinging because I don't want to listen to you whine in the back of the ambulance, take you out and turf you off. There's a huge difference. And why? So the Americans, we've been paramedics since 72. Mm-hmm. And you've been a paramedic organization since, you said, 08. So what's the difference here? Why is it that the British are leading the paramedic push for global health, for looking at the big picture and having the power to treat and release and having a better approach to paramedicine?
That's a really fabulous question. I would say, I'm currently undertaking a study where I'm looking at the professionalisation of the paramedic profession, specifically in the United Kingdom. But obviously, in order to do that study, I have had to look and continue to look internationally in terms of comparable countries and different models and providers and that sort of stuff. And what I would say is that one of the things here is around that professionalisation strategy. So the big leaps and bounds came about, I would argue, almost by accident, in that they were as a result, largely, and not exclusively, but largely as a result of we happened to be in the right place at the right time when politicians made decisions, and we sort of almost rode on the coattails and went, okay, yeah, we'll go with this a little bit. I'll go back to just very, very briefly. There was the 1989 ambulance dispute, which was the first time where there was a big bust up with the government, and the ambulance workers, as we're called, went out on strike because their pay had fallen below that of firefighters and all sorts. And I'm doing a big disservice on this, and there are some phenomenal texts for people to read, and I'm more than happy to talk about this in much more detail at some other point. But for the purpose of today, one of the points of resolution from that was a little side note that said, and to get some additional money, this pay agreement, we will invest in paramedical training. That was the first recorded usage in the UK. This sort of throwaway, and we'll have some paramedic style training. And then fast forward then to 1997, when Tony Blair and New Labour got into power here in the UK. They won the general election, defeating the incumbent Conservative John Major. They then went around doing some radical NHS reforms. And what they were trying to do there is they said, we need to reform our National Health Service to make it work for people. What that also meant was that they're saying, actually, we can get some of these professions allied to medicine, as they were called at the time. We can get some of these, as now allied health professions, we can get them to do some stuff that currently we pay very expensive doctors to do. Okay, and again, I'm trying to boil this really down, so I hope none of your listeners take offence to anything that I'm saying, because. But as a result of that, my profession grasped onto the opportunity of hey, we're deregulating, we're liberalising some of the structures here, and that's when you started seeing things like the Bradley Report 2005, Taking Healthcare to the Patient, which was Department of Health in England, but that really set the tone for the profession for the last 20 years in terms of saying we should be the ambulance service. They were talking about paramedics and ambulance. They were conflating the two things, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But they were conflating the two things, but effectively saying the ambulance service should be a mobile health resource. We should be going out to the patient and delivering more care in the community. We should be thinking about these wider pieces. And hey, we're 20 years on. This is a marathon, not a sprint. But a lot of the innovations or a lot of the advances that we've had is as a direct result of the government going, we need to do more community-based care, and fundamentally why, from a health economics point of view, it is cheaper to deliver care in the community than it is in big institutions, hospitals, and that sort of environment. And we've taken the opportunity to do that and effectively push the boundary of the scope of practice of our profession to say, well, yeah, of course we can do that. And yes, of course we can do that. And yes, we'll work in the community. And because we have that grounding as, in originally battlefield medicine and then into that sort of austere ambulance environment, going out into the community, it's dark, it's raining, there's a car upside down, in a ditch, you've got to deal with it. There's zero lighting, minimal equipment, because we have been born in that austere. The profession was born in that sort of austere environment, and that is our natural, I'd say, comfortable place. I don't think I've ever been laid upside down in a motorway ditch at 2 o'clock in the morning in a particularly comfortable. But you know what I mean? Because that is something that is so entrenched in our professional identity, or has been historically, we naturally are much more adept at turning our hand to go, I can work in a primary care centre. Yes, I can work in a prison environment. Yes, I can work on a cruise ship. Yes, I can go and do some wilderness medicine. So I think there's a piece there, but a lot of it, like I say, I'm currently looking at that sort of strategy of professionalisation. And it's around the where does the big shoves come from, seeing an opportunity in the political direction. Another one, I'll give you an example. We had the UK general election last year. Labour returned to power. Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, which only covers England, I should say. The UK being a country of countries, but the 10-year health plan is all about moving care from the hospital to the community. There is now a massive opportunity for us to do another big shove towards how we can move that forward. And I think we've just been adept at doing that, which is where I think that piece comes in.
Add on to that, the push for academia. The UK Paramedic used to be based off of a tiered system, the IACD, basically like the States, where you do an EMT course and you can go drive an ambulance, and then after a while you get your paramedic, and it was the same for you. So you had the technician after 6 weeks, and then you top that up with an additional year, if I remember right, to get paramedic. And then right around the 2008 time frame, you decided, you as the British, I'm having you speak for every paramedic in the UK. You woke up and said, no, we need academia, and it's just never been done before. And then you start out. I think you said you did a foundation degree, so it was a 2-year degree to get your paramedic, and they've upped that to 3. What has paramedic? So paramedics is an academic endeavor in the UK, and a lot of people have followed with that. In Ireland, we now have a bachelor's degree, and the Australians do, South Africans do. So how has that helped as well? So not only have you pushed for excellence, and you said bringing paramedicine or healthcare, global health out into the community where we work, but how has academia helped your profession?
That's a really fabulous question. You're right. So I was in one of the first cohorts of foundation degree qualified paramedics at so I studied at the University of Worcester in the West Midlands, and I think I did my course in 2008, and it was just on the cusp where this was I think there were 15 in my group, of which I think 9 of us graduated or something. It was a really small numbers comparative to now, where you have, some universities do cohorts of over 100 multiple times a year, which is really interesting. But I did my foundation degree in pre-hospital and scheduled and emergency care, because this was before paramedic science or paramedic practice or paramedicine wasn't even in our lexicon at this point. So I did this course, and it was fabulous. It was really interesting. But I reflect a little bit on my own personal journey to this as well. I remember having a conversation with a very good friend of mine in the canteen at university just as we were finishing. and they were talking about, there might be a little bit of funding, or they're going to let us come back and do the third year to get get a bachelor's degree, and I think I might do that, and because who knows where the profession is going to go. And me here, I was like, I can't believe you're going to say that. I'm never going to set foot in the university again. I'm done with this whole academic stuff. I don't see the point of it. I wish I could have just done the whole technician route thing, but this was the way that I'd sort of come to it at the time, and I will never set foot in a university again. And surprisingly, all these numbers of years later, I'm the one that works in higher education and has the portfolio paramedic career of consultancy work, education, research, expert witness stuff. And my friend still works in the ambulance service in a frontline paramedic role, which I thought was quite interesting. But in terms of your question for what has academia done for the profession, I think professionalisation of any profession, education is the foundation. It's the bedrock of that, and really it's around identifying the knowledge, the curriculum, the area of work, the scope of practice, the boundary of the claimed territory of a profession, formalizing that. But also really in the case of paramedicine, it's around, in terms of the physical skills that we teach, they don't change year on year on year massively. So some things come in, some things go in as new equipment or new drugs, and things change. The biggest thing that academia has done for our profession, and I would say for any healthcare profession, is that it has formalized the importance of decision making and critical thinking skills and rationalization and justification and evidence-based medicine. It is around often pre-registration students, I've worked at a number of universities over the years, but pre-registration students will say, oh, why have I got to write an essay on X? What is the point of writing an essay? And saying, well, actually the point of, you're doing advocacy, which is what you're doing for your patients every single day. You are taking lots of pieces of information, you are evaluating them, analyzing them, you are reviewing them, and then you are building a narrative to come to a conclusion, or to have a discussion around, this is the problem, here are some potential solutions. That's all that you're doing with every single patient that you ever see, is you're taking in history, you're taking in physical assessment signs, you're taking in observations from, if you have monitoring, you're taking in the wider environment, you're taking in all of this information, you're weighing it up, and you're making decisions based on that. And the academics, the move into academia has really formalized that, and also the non-technical skills, which I think has been fabulous. And also the other hallmark of a profession is that we're constantly learning about ourselves, but we're also now researching about what we are doing, have done, and should do in the future. There's this beautiful concept, isn't there, of the half-life of truth. I think back to my original program, and there's a good percentage of the stuff on there now that we now know is harmful to patients, we shouldn't be doing, the equipment's been withdrawn, but we didn't know that at the time. But I often say this to potential students, not just at my university, but in sort of the other guises that I sort of work. And I say, what we have to remember is the purpose of university isn't to learn to become a paramedic. The purpose of university is to learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn, how to learn to be reflective, how to learn to think. And the byproduct of you doing this program is that you learn to be a paramedic, that you get the context of being a paramedic. But the actual program is designed to get you to think as an autonomous professional. And most people look at me as if I've grown a second head, and then normally by the time they get to about the end of the second year, they still go, I can sort of see what you're trying to say here. But at the time when they first applied to the program, they think I've gone a little bit crazy.
I think that's the crux of the difference. To think as an autonomous professional, coming from the States, we are giving if-them statements. If this happens, do this. And we can't treat and release at all. And there is no autonomy whatsoever. And again, I have a lot of friends who are going to email me and give me all sorts of grief over that statement. But comparing where you are as a UK paramedic compared to what I saw in the States and what I've seen in other places, that's it. You're taught to think as an autonomous professional.
Yes. And it's interesting as well, because something that lots of registered paramedics struggle with the concept of is defining your scope of practice. In the UK, the HCPC, the regulator, does not define individual registrant scope of practice. So at the point of registration, so you finish your 3-year degree and you register with the regulator. At that point, your scope of practice is pretty much what it says in the standards of proficiency for paramedics. However, as you know, the HCP says, as you progress through your career, you may no longer meet all of the standards of proficiency, and your practice may develop and it may become narrower in scope. And this is the crux of it. The statement from the regulator says, determining what is and is not part of your scope of practice is for you to decide using your professional judgment. Now, if you don't have the skills to do that, how can you possibly determine that? That is that is it, isn't it?
Yes, and you have your own license. You don't work under anyone else's license. You take your bag home at night and you can have all your narcs, all your drugs in your house, because wherever you are, on duty, off duty, you're an autonomous, licensed professional.
Yes, and you have that interesting thing where the only caveat that is potentially put on you or restriction is your employer. So, for example, if I worked for ambulance service A and event medical provider B, let's say, it may be that ambulance service A has decided that, okay, we're going to use drug A rather than drug B, whereas the event medical provider might say, well, we're using drug B instead of drug A. And the only difference there is it's about, well, this is what my employer is providing to me. So that's what I'm going to do. Or these are the constraints whereby my employer might say, okay, we know that you are educated to use a particular piece of equipment, but we're not providing that equipment because we've, as the provider, have decided we're not going to do that. So then you can't undertake that. But that's a contractual employment issue. That's not a regulatory problem. So it might be that I'm not allowed to do something for my employer because my contract of employment says I can't, but the regulator has no part in that. Providing if I can justify why, if something is or isn't in my scope of practice, that's for me as the individual autonomous registrant to do.
It's been interesting for me, being a couple of decades now on this side of the pond, to see the growth of the UK paramedic and the leadership within the world of paramedicine. And you have master's level ACP paramedics who are similar level of junior doctors that are able to do everything that a junior doctor can do, which is unheard of. So I guess a question I have for you is, where do you see the future of paramedics going? I mean, you have gone from 08, where you had a 2-year degree, a foundation degree, to the point where now you have a master's of advanced clinical practice, where you are trained up to the level of a junior doctor. Where do you see the future going from here?
Well, it's really interesting, and I've certainly not had a traditional trajectory. So you're right to say. So I have a 2-year foundation degree. I then went back to university and topped that up, and I did all sorts of stuff. I did philosophy, leadership, change management, clinical supervision, all sorts of different subjects. I then went and did I did a qualifying law degree as a master's degree in English law. So I have an English qualifying law degree, so I could have gone on to be a lawyer, but then I decided to move to Scotland. And as we know, the United Kingdom is a country of countries, and in Scotland we have a completely different legal jurisdiction. So my legal qualification means I can't practice in Scotland, which is really interesting. But it does give a really good foundation to that. I'm now pursuing a PhD in management, looking at strategic leadership and the other bits and pieces we were talking about earlier. And I have my postgraduate certificate in teaching for higher education. And I think it's really fascinating in terms of, at the moment, I'm currently looking at what are the boundaries of the paramedic profession. And quite honestly, I can't elucidate it, in that, and there will probably be people shouting at your podcast right now, but in terms of, I believe that with the right education, with the right governance, and with the need for a particular role or working in a different space, that there are no hard boundaries. There might be some soft boundaries. There are legal boundaries in terms of what is lawful, what is unlawful. But as we know, laws can be changed. Up until not that long ago, paramedics couldn't be independent prescribers. The law has been changed. Now we can be in the UK. I guess all we have to recognise is that, just as I don't think that we necessarily have any hard boundaries, then other professions may also be able to operate in the same arenas that we are doing. But what I think delineates us out as a profession comparative to some of my other colleagues who there are some wonderful people from other professions, is that because our education is grounded and entrenched and steeped in that austere environment, our philosophy of how we approach patients is fundamentally different to those people who come to the austere environment later in their career as a specialist, as opposed to it being the normal working environment for a profession. But in terms of your question of where are the boundaries, I don't know, and I think that's really exciting. And clearly, different players, different stakeholders will have their own views, and there will be other people that think, oh yes, no, that paramedics definitely shouldn't do X or Y. And normally they talk about specific skills. So paramedics shouldn't be able to do a surgical, this surgical procedure, or paramedics shouldn't be able to give this particular drug, or they shouldn't be able to. And I think it's so much more complex than that. There are always going to be boundaries, but I don't think there's ever going to be a unilateral and universal boundary to this profession, which was effectively born through the militarization, through as we identified earlier, through the Neapolitan Wars and John Dominic Larry, and then moved into sort of the austere ambulance environment, in fact, taking healthcare to the patient. There is a need for that, and whilst there is a need for paramedics to do what paramedics do, whether that is in education, leadership, management, research, clinical practice, and whether that clinical practice is ambulance-based, cross-sector, primary care, secondary care, public health, whatever it might happen to be, wherever there is a need, the foundation stone of paramedicine is that we can adapt in austere and differing and challenging environments with undifferentiated caseloads.
I like that. Our whole reality from day one of a paramedic is, look, you're out and about. This is your rig, and you're going to do all of your scenarios on this is a casualty that's in their house. You're nowhere near the hospital. So everything about our reality is out of hospital. And so our shift, when we start, if we choose to move into austere medicine or cruise liners or wilderness medicine, it's not that big of a shift. But for the nurse and doctor, everything they're taught from day one is, here's your wall full of kit. You're in a hospital with a team of people, and here's your casualty. And we're different. We look at things that we're taught from day one to be different.
And I think that's one of the things in thinking about professionalization of the profession that I think we also struggle with as well. You're absolutely right in terms of, and that is why, traditionally we were a blue collar trade-esque, training focused, algorithmic group of people. And it's now about getting the best of both worlds, where we almost span. We do lots of work whereby there is that piece about we're still having direct patient care. We're not truly white collar workers in the sense of being, having clients and being completely sort of distanced from those individuals. But equally, the patterns and the areas that we work within are now span that entire spectrum, and there is quite a lot of work there around that question of how we see ourselves as a profession. And lots of paramedics in the UK still, and this is an evolutionary process, but would still say, well, I'm a paramedic because I work on an ambulance. But equally, I don't think that is now reflective of and hasn't been of the profession for a long time. But as with everything, there is a significant level of complexity within that.
James, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new paramedic, the new nurse, new doc who is just starting out on their career in austere medicine?
That's a fabulous question. I think it's all about the thought process. It's all about the thinking process. In that, if you can ground yourself in what is the evidence base? Why am I doing something? Why am I not doing something? You will never go too far wrong. In that, those principles of what do I have in front of me? What are my options? What can I realistically deliver in this environment to this person at this point? And when I say that, it's about It's about me, the individual, you, the individual. It's about the patient, the individual, the environment, whether that is the geographical positioning that you're in, whether that is whether you're in somebody's centrally heated house at 3:00 in an afternoon, or whether you're in the middle of an ocean at 2:00 in the morning, or whether you're halfway up a mountain, or whether you're in a desert, or wherever you might happen to be, that environmental piece, and then the skills, the knowledge that you have or that is available to you, and taking all of that to come up with a plan that will give your patient the best possible response that you can give in that moment. And we have to really think about us as the individuals here, in that just because I can deliver skill X, professionals often talk about, well, I can do skill X or I can give drug Y. But just because I can do a particular skill doesn't necessarily mean, showing up every day for work or whatever it is that you're doing, a different level of you turns up every single day. And some days you may be able to take cannulation. Some days you can throw cannulas in from the other side of a room. Another day, it can be sat there. It is the absolute gift. You have everything set up for you and you miss every single one. And that is just a fact of the people in this, the human part of that. And it's about recognizing that. But I would say it's the decision making. It's about focus on the decision making, because I often say this, and this is a little bit contentious perhaps in UK paramedic context, because there is currently a move afoot around lots of UK ambulance services are removing endotracheal intubation. And I've said, and I say to my students all the time, I'm like, don't focus on the tube. All right. If I had a monkey and a bag of bananas and some intubation kit, in a couple of hours' time, the monkey will be able to intubate. Right. The doing the skill is important, and I'm not reducing that, but that is such a small part. The decision to go, why am I going to elevate to an ETI? What is the justification? What is the risks of doing this? What is the risks of not doing that? Are there any other factors? Is this potentially going to be a difficult airway? Do I have a plan B? Do I have any top cover? What happens if it goes well? What happens if it doesn't? The thinking behind that and coming up with that wider holistic approach, that's the bit that marks you as a professional, not the fact that you can stick a bit of plastic into somebody's airway.
That's good advice. James Brogan, thank you for taking some time to chat today about the philosophy of British thinking of paramedicine, and it's been fantastic to have you as a guest.
Thanks, Aebhric. Thanks, I really enjoyed it.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.